I think we're good to go.
Who else are we expecting? Do we know?
Scott Winkles had asked to be on this committee. I don't know if I didn't hear back from him. Jay Noller had asked to be on this committee. I also didn't hear back from him, other than that this time should work for him.
Okay, well, let's just plunge in and be efficient about our time. So we, do you want to, let's see, I think it was it you, Sunny, who distributed the agenda?
I did. Would you like me to put it on the screen?
Yeah, that would be great. And I think we all know each other, but we should just start with a round of introductions as a good practice. So I'll start. I'm Pam Marsh. I am a state representative from Southern Jackson County, and I am convening this little subcommittee of the hemp and cannabis, the House Bill 3000 task force, which of course is, as you all know, has a much fancier name as the Task Force on Cannabis-Derived Intoxicants and Illegal Cannabis Production. And we have organized ourselves as a large task force, and then with 3 subcommittees, this being one of them, to focus on water and natural resource questions. Rosie, I'll just call on everybody so that we can be efficient here.
You know, I'm not part of the task force. I think I'm here to listen. So Rosie Shatkin, OLCC, but just to listen in.
Great. Thank you, Rosie. Sunny.
Good afternoon. I'm Sunny Summers. I'm a senior policy advisor to the director of the Oregon Department of Ag, and I'm staffing this with Rep. Marsh's staff person Nolan's assistance.
Thank you. And Lauren.
Good afternoon. Lauren Henderson, the Deputy Director with the Oregon Department of Agriculture.
And Jake.
Jake Johnstone, Field Services Deputy Administrator, Oregon Water Resource Department.
Great. And I think that comprises the official membership of the group, but I expect us to be able to be very flexible and incorporate comments and thoughts from other people. So I'm going to have everybody who's on the line introduce themselves. Matt.
Yeah, I should have been on the list because I submitted a request to Sunny, but yeah, my name is Matt Cyrus. I'm a 6th generation farmer over in Central Oregon, raise hay and hemp and a few cows.
Okay, Matt, I do see that you were on the list. Apologize. Glad that you were here. And Beth Petrino, you're also on the list.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Petrino. I work for the Legislative Policy and Research Office, and I'm currently staffing the Senate Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery Committee. And I am here to help support the subcommittee and help to be maybe a bridge to the whatever might come out of the work group that comes into the next session. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Actually, it turns out everybody was on the list, so I apologize to all of you. I should have looked at my my event details. Jonathan.
Yep, Jonathan Sandow, Assistant Director at Department of Ag.
And Scott, are you here now?
Yes, Representative Scott Winkles representing the League of Oregon Cities.
Super. Did I catch everyone there? Anybody else out there? I don't think so. So our committee has a couple of official assignments that were contained in one of the 2 pieces of legislation. And those are changes to state law to address water theft and other unauthorized uses of water, and other environmental considerations, potentially including the use of pesticides, water contaminants, and site cleanup. Some of that additional language I don't think was actually in the bills, but we've added them as a result of conversations. And then we also have regulation to address genetic engineering of cannabis. Those are, those are basically our assignments to address anything that falls within those parameters. I don't think that our work should be considered to be limited to those parameters. If there are other things that fall generally into the natural resources and water category that we should look at, although we have a pretty broad assignment. So with that, I think what would be helpful is to review the water legislation that was passed in the short session, and maybe to get any kind of update, if there is any update on how that started to roll out. And Jake, I didn't ask you to do this ahead of time, but would you be willing to just give us an impromptu summary and anything you want to say about rollout?
Yeah, Rep. Marsh, I'd be fine doing that. I don't have 4061 in front of me, but I can probably hit the high notes here. So 4061, increased penalties. So something folks don't understand is that Water Resource Department already has the ability to do civil penalties through our administrative process, as well as criminal penalties, or pursue criminal citation authority. Criminal is not an avenue that we've used with any frequency or regularity in water resources. We've really reserved that for some egregious issues. However, in this kind of environment that we're dealing with now with illicit cannabis production, that's something we're reevaluating. 4061 also created some more severe penalties there. There's the Class A misdemeanor and a $25,000 fine. It also looked to address water hauling associated with illicit cannabis grow sites, as well as give more guidance to put in statute and subsequently rule that water haulers must maintain record of, must provide said record to law enforcement and Water Resource Department. There are some other changes in there, more specifically targeting water haulers or cannabis producers who use water hauling. And so, you know, those are really the broad points of it. It also does something procedurally for us. Currently, our administrative notice of violation process is tied to a 5-day time frame, meaning, you know, from observing non-compliance, we have 5 days to issue a notice of violation, and those are calendar days. 4061 changes that to 10 business days, which will be huge for us because we're dealing with somewhat of a scramble and a bottleneck when it comes to those enforcements. Partially related to the additional staffing we got in 5561 in the December special session. So currently the department where we're at with the 4061 rollout, that legislation changes the statutes. And we have done quite a bit of outreach, coordinated outreach with our friends at OLCC and ODA. So rolling out some educational documentation, kind of letting water haulers, bulk fill suppliers, and cannabis producers know what the changes in statute are going to mean for them. And really, we've just been focused on coordinated education and outreach at this point. Moving forward with those statutory changes, the department understands that we need to address those in rule as well. So we are looking at rulemaking as a process to, you know, kind of shore up and make these more defensible for possible litigation. So that's a real brief overview and update. I could go into more depth, but I could pause there and see if there are any questions, or we can move on.
I'm not sure. Thank you, Jake. Thanks for letting me call on you and putting me on the spot. I'm not sure I heard you mention that the bill also requires a record keeping responsibility of people who are selling bulk water as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, and thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, it puts a record keeping responsibility on the water supplier, the water hauler, and if the cannabis producer is itself also a water hauler, I believe it's similar there, similar language. So it really looks to codify a lot of the things we've been asking and, you know, dealing with in the cannabis industry. We've been saying, hey, what are your water hauling receipts? Please provide those to us. You know, and then for some municipalities already had systems in place where this is not a big lift for them. Jackson and Josephine County, there are a few locations where they already have some card readers in place. So modifying that infrastructure shouldn't be too problematic for them. But, you know, there are also some small municipal water suppliers around the state who may have some difficulties in adjusting to that. So we're trying to work with them on education and kind of what that looks like.
So all of this is rolling out now. I know we've had press down here in Jackson County about how the Water Commission is setting up the requirements around their record keeping. And of course, the illegal season, to the extent that it has a season, is really just getting going. So we don't have, I'm assuming at this point, we really don't have any takeaways for how that's working or whether there are gaps or issues that should be addressed in that legislation.
Well, again, we're really focusing on education and outreach at this point.
Yeah.
You know, the department does feel that it would be best if we address this in rule, you know, in addition to the statutory changes that are a result of the legislation. So in order for us to do that, we've got to open up our Division 250 and 260 rules, which are our water master duties and our enforcement processes, and kind of address those, because our process through notices of violation and administrative processes that we've been using and continue to use, you know, those are specific to the statutes that were already in play. And so we want to open up that 260 and clean it up so we can try and get these new modifications as a result of 4061 into there. I haven't really heard too many issues because we aren't utilizing that 4061 statutory changes yet in the absence of rulemaking with this process. The main thing has just been, you know, water haulers asking us what they need to do, what's required for them to do their due diligence. And we have heard of water haulers taking it upon themselves to not provide water to sites that aren't registered. So that does seem to be getting some traction. And we are getting more questions from water haulers trying to make sure they're doing their due diligence to protect themselves. So we are seeing some movement in that direction in those regards.
Well, that seems great. I mean, because that's part of what we were trying to shine light on, is the fact that haulers now have an who may have been simply looking the other way now have an actual obligation to think about who they're taking water to. That doesn't, of course, address the informal water hauling, but one step at a time.
Jake, this is Lauren. How have you done on hiring your staff? We're struggling with getting recruitments out. Are you doing okay getting those new staff?
Yeah, we actually had some recent successes. So we had the 14 positions statewide, 5 of which were housing in the Northwest, 6 were going to be housing in the Southwest. We just got signed offer letters for numbers 4 and 5. So we had 3 already on of those 6 assistant water masters. 4 and 5 have signed, and 1 starts the 16th of July out of the Grants Pass office, another one August 1st. And then I believe we have the 6th pending an offer letter. So I will say, though, to your point, Lauren, it did take us quite some time to fill those 6 positions. I started that recruitment in December, and we're just now getting to the point where we can fill out those 6. The 5 in the Northwest are all hired. They all haven't started yet, but we do have signed offer letters for those. So yeah, I mean, our department, as most of you know, we got quite a few new positions, which is a great thing. We're very happy about that. But yeah, recruiting in this job environment has been very difficult and taxing. And we have done a lot of legwork only to find out, you know, after reference checks and offer letters and even a signed offer letter, someone gets a better job and says, I'm not going to show. So it's been tough.
The reason why I asked that question is I know, you know, part of the task of this committee, subcommittee, and the reason why this subject is there is, would you say, the safety issues aside for your staff and our staff, would you say you're in a much better position today when a complaint comes in about illegal water use than you were last year that we're going into the season, as Rep Marsh just said? Are you in a better spot to address those yet, or not really?
I would say we're in a better spot to address complaint totals to make sure that there are complaints that, you know, don't go missed. Whereas last year and the year before, we just didn't have the capacity to address every complaint. We feel more confident with the staff volume we have now. Also, with that additional staffing, we're able to use the buddy system more often for security purposes, just to make, you know, folks feel more comfortable about the process and to be more thoughtful in that process. We're also able to coordinate more with county code enforcement and law enforcement because we have increased staff capacity. So we're able to, you know, have one person speed dial from county code enforcement. So if they need a water resource person to, join them at a moment's notice, we may be able to respond to that more effectively. So I do feel that we are we're better positioned going into this irrigation season than we have been previously due to that increase in staffing.
That's great news.
Anybody else have any questions for Jake about the legislation that we passed and the implementation of that bill? So the main item on our agenda today was really intended to be a brainstorming from this group regarding areas that you think we should be that fall appropriately under our pretty broad assignment of natural resources and water. Specific items that maybe need to be addressed, or very, very certainly need just a first investigation. So what I'd like to do is really just open it up to thoughts of people. We went through quite a public process, very intense public process, down to the deadline in putting together HB 4061. Clearly, water's been a lot of the concern in many parts of our state, certainly mine, when we already have drought conditions on the ground, for people to feel that water was being misused by unlicensed and illegal operations was sort of really exacerbated the concerns and the resentment toward those operations. And I think 4061 has been received really positively in the community as a real evidence that we are trying to do something. But it doesn't address, of course, in any way illegal water hauling or illegal use of irrigation water, other than to rely upon the existing processes that we have with our water masters. So Jake, in all you were part of those discussions, and all those big discussions, we kind of whittled it down to a question of what would make a difference and what can we pass in a short session, which is a big calculation that needed to be made. Are there other issues that you personally felt were left on the table because we didn't have time to investigate them further, but that still need to be picked up at this point? Not necessarily to turn into legislation, but that need a second look.
Yeah, well, that is a good question, and you Rep. Marsh, you've put me on the spot twice now.
Okay.
So
you're our water guy here, Jake.
Yeah, I expect a door prize or something. So some of the stuff that got left on the drawing room floor regarding 4061, and then to your point, it's a valid point. Short session, it's hard to get a lot of stuff into there. Water Resource Department has long, suggested and asked for, as a part of any application for hemp or cannabis production, a water right would be a requirement. I believe that was, scrapped just because it was too far-reaching and probably obviously would implicate ODA rules and statutes, as well as OLCC rules and statutes, and perhaps that was left on the drawing room floor just purely from volume perspective. That allows for a process as part of the application process to say what you are looking to do requires X. Now, let's be fair, that only would address those who are willing to play ball and register their cannabis production sites. So I think that's worth clarifying, right? That's not going to help address illicit cannabis production sites. That's kind of one of the only things I remember from the process back in when we started this 4061 language. That was left out, was making it a requirement for either one of those agencies.
And Jake, can you remind me, on cannabis, we either have that requirement or locals can apply it. Do we have that requirement?
So
somebody else?
Time, place, and manner is associated with cannabis production,
right.
Recreational cannabis production. And Sunnywood and Lauren would understand this better than I, obviously, but the hemp is different because of right to farm, as I understand it, and it being, a U.S. commodity or whatever the case may be. So again, not my arena, but.
And recognizing different product, different regulatory agencies. But for cannabis, do we not, we do require at some level, whether it's county or state, evidence of some statement about water, I think. Is anybody?
There's a statement of water. I believe it's an attestation as part of the application process. But if I remember correctly, and if there's anyone from OLCC or maybe Rosie might have a good answer on this, it is not actually codified as a requirement of the application, nor violating Oregon Water Resource Department rules being included as a reason for losing your license. Those are the two things that, if they were, that would be great. But again, let's be fair, that's only for those who are registering.
Right.
And I'll jump in, and then I see that Matt Cyrus has a hand up. So we used to require it for OLCC. They used to require it on the application, and then they dropped it because they realized they didn't have the statutory authority, I think. And then I'm not sure if they're still asking for it, if it's just an attestation. And that's specifically about water. The time, manner, place is really around land use and zoning. And then ODA does include it as part of the application, and it's more of an attestation. And if somebody were to lie on the application and we found out later, that could potentially impact their license. But we also do not technically have statutory authority to say you have to prove to us that you have water or that you're going to have an appropriate contract with a water hauler prior to receiving that license.
So just to clarify, that's on the cannabis front?
That's on the hemp application.
Okay, for hemp, that's where
it's
you segue to that.
And I think that the OLCC one is similar.
Okay, so
we'd have to double check with Amanda.
So ODA does require an attestation of water on the part of somebody when they're applying for their permit.
Correct.
And then is anybody on the line who knows the equivalent for cannabis?
Matt's got his hand up.
Oh, Matt, please,
Yeah.
we're a small group, so let's just jump in if you can without using hands. So Matt.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, like you say, Sunny pretty well covered it, but the last couple times I've done my hemp application, I've had to provide the water right number and a map on where that water right is actually shown, which can be gotten online. But yeah, it's one of the list of things I had to require.
Okay, is that a state, is that an ODA requirement or is that a county requirement?
That's
It's
ODA.
an ODA.
Okay, so the map, I mean, that sounds like a fairly attestation. I'm envisioning you initial something. This sounds like it's actually more than just initialing. You actually have to give some documentation. Is that right, Matt?
That was my understanding. That's what I provided, was documentation of what my water certificate number was and where it was mapped on the property.
Sunny, I don't remember that level of detail. Matt, good job if you've provided all of that. This is Lauren. While Sunny's, I can tell Sunny's pondering what Matt submitted. I think the key to that is ODA has we put that on there so people couldn't say I didn't know I needed water. Really, to be honest with you, we don't have the resources or even the legal horsepower to then go even do a random check without Jake. Jake and his crew are the water folks, and so it's, I want to make sure we're managing what people know. We've done it to make sure that people can't say I didn't know I needed water. Obviously, farmers like Matt, who have done this for years in the farming, know what they're doing and where their water is and what they can do with it. Oh, thank you, Sunny. But that's really what it was for, because we knew there were a lot of folks into this. Forget the illegal folks; they're illegal all over the place. That maybe didn't know you couldn't take your domestic well and all of a sudden turn it into an irrigation source.
Okay, so permit is obviously permit number of the water right, if you're using a water right, is indicated here. And then the map sounds like that was bonus.
That was bonus. So yes, good on you, Matt. And then I reached out to Stephen Crowley at OLCC, and he says that the form has them attest that they have a legal source. They also have discretion in rule to request proof of a legal water source, and they resumed exercising that discretion around the start of the year. So investigators are collecting their water right, their OWRD exempt source paperwork, or water hauling contract as part of the investigation process.
So is this information conveyed to the water masters in individual communities? I'm just thinking if there was a verification or validation of the information that was being provided, is that confidential information to the department? Can you pass it to the local water master?
ODA can. There's nothing that would
So it's
keep
not
us from
information.
I'm sorry, I missed part of your question there, Rutmark.
Well, I think Sunny answered it. The question was, once you've collected this at permit, I'm just thinking about the departments that are collecting it obviously aren't in a position to validate the truth of what's being provided.
Sure.
So the question is that information provided in any way to a water master or to somebody who could actually validate it, assuming that they had personnel to do so?
Yeah, we've actually got a pretty good relationship going now between our assistant water masters funded through this 5561 in December, and both ODA and OLCC, and sharing kind of this is the list of applications, this is where they are. And then it's my understanding that they'll then, go through and look at them and then high grade that list for those without water rights, and then kind of as necessary case by case with OLCC, it may involve looking into a specific file. So we do have that collaborative effort going, and that communication is happening.
That's super. That's really great to hear. Is there anything else on the front? Again, given that we're talking about the people who bother to get a permit or a license, who ostensibly are doing something legal. Is there any other kind of oversight or enforcement mechanisms that you can imagine being useful to the water masters for this category of user?
For the permitted category of user?
Yeah, permitted or licensed.
I can't think of anything right now. I think our working relationship has evolved exponentially over the last handful of years between our three agencies, and that's been great to see. We do have a lot more communication now with this increase in staff between their field inspectors and our field inspectors, so that's working out great. I don't really see anything, and just to clarify my previous statement, it's not that the applicant doesn't have to or isn't as a part of the application process providing a statement or attestation of what their water use is. It's my question more specifically, or thought is it in statute that violating water law negates your registration or denies you a license? I don't believe it is. And that was the only thing if we're looking at it from a statutory perspective. And again, that wouldn't be our statutes, it would be ODA or OLCC. I do recall from a rules advisory committee I sat on a few years ago for OLCC, buried in there is some language that says if you violate these certain ordinances, you may lose your license, but ours weren't in those. I think they were specific to land use, and they may have even been tied into that land use component of time, place, and manner. But it was just something that we were kicking around back when we started talking about 4061. So just looking at a deterrent.
Well, I think that's a really good question. Sunny, can you confirm that that is not included on the list of warnings, essentially, that Jake referred to?
Yeah, I don't think ODA would have authority to deny or revoke somebody's license due to a water law violation.
and Rosie's supporting it as well. She's put a lot of resources here in the chat for those who haven't seen it.
Yeah, this is also from our conversation with 4061, and we're gathering information from the 2022 session. So what I submitted here was what we had from, sort of had a policy. It wasn't necessarily a statutory policy. So I wasn't sure whether or not that was incorporated in 4061 to codify it there, but.
Rich, I see a note from you. Are you on the phone?
Oh, no, Rich Evans, that's from me.
Oh, okay.
It was
a different
sorry about that.
typeface, so I thought it looked like a different typeface in my.
Representative,
Yeah.
this is Matt Cyrus again. See, I guess maybe back to square zero. Which specific problem is most the issue we're trying to address? Is it, big landowners that have been farming forever that are not using their water properly? Is it mostly water that's being hauled, or is it illicit guys that are out in the woods and tap into a creek?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And to answer it, we're sort of parsing it in different categories. Is it the legal? Have we done everything we could for people that we can identify as being at least ostensibly legal users? And then is there any other powers we need to address all those different categories that you just mentioned, Cyrus? And if so, then what about the illegal users who are doing any one of those things? I mean, it's possible, I guess, that an illegal user can an illegal user legally use water if they're using a water right? Is it by definition illegal for an illegal user to use water, even if it's a legal water right?
So Rep. Marsh, you're getting into beneficial use, and you may recall there's a group
right
out of Josephine County that's been really chasing that one. Currently, it is not a misallocation of a permitted water right to water a non-registered cannabis site. Beneficial use just leaves, it is defined as irrigation to promote plant growth and a number of different rules and statutes. And so what 4061 did change was municipal water can't be hauled under the auspices of water hauling to illicit cannabis farms. So if you have a 100-acre farm of cannabis that has a valid water right of record for, quote, irrigation, it's not a violation of water law to irrigate that crop under the current rules and statutes.
So then we shift to law enforcement, not to water resources.
Correct. And so if I made it to Matt's point, our hemp audit, which we're very grateful ODA helped us fund in that first 2019 year, found 33% of water rights, 33% of registered hemp sites were violating water law in one way, shape, or form. A significant number of those actually had water rights, but were using a well because they didn't have to pH balance it, or it was just more convenient. Also, in irrigation district boundaries now, as a result of ongoing drought and climate change, our irrigation district patrons are seeing less of a delivery season. In the Rogue Valley last year, I think there was 6 weeks of irrigation delivery from 3 irrigation districts. And so in those situations, you have a well-established farm of very large magnitude, may even have multiple different crops, but now they've lost access to their primary source of water. So yeah, to your point there, I guess what I would say is we have a multitude of complaints that involve the locked gate and the heavily wooded forest and hard to make access. We also do find issues purely because of scarcity and lack of supply. So the stream dries up and regulation occurs earlier. So now you're forced to make a hard decision. Do you haul water for 40 acres or do you violate water law or let the crop die? So it really does kind of span across the whole umbrella for our irrigating community, and not obviously limited just to hemp and cannabis. That just seems to be the big one right now in Southwestern Oregon.
Okay, so shifting to the illegal users. So beneficial use protects, from a water resources point of view, if they have a water right, we're not looking at what they're growing. They're just using the water appropriately for that piece of property. or they're using the water that's legally assigned to that piece of property. What other tools does Water Resources need to go after the inappropriate use of water by those users? There's the issue of the gate.
Mm-hmm. So law enforcement, so I'm on the law enforcement subcommittee as well. And this is where we step into that realm, right? Because access, warrants, investigative processes, criminal versus administrative, those are really things that we're tossing around. I think we met yesterday or the day before in that committee as well. The gate is a law enforcement umbrella. You know, that's an access issue, that's constitutional right and due process, et cetera. So that's kind of where I feel like for Water Resources, an increase in staffing was huge for us. So we are very grateful for that, and we were really working hard to get those folks running. So that'll be part of it. The other part, though, is really when it comes to the illicit market, the water master is never going to be the silver bullet when it comes to, you know, 100-acre hoop houses. So, I mean, I know you've heard that ad nauseum, Rep. Marsh, but it does bear repeating when it comes to natural resources and the illicit, you know, DTOs and cartel trafficking. So, you know, there's a level where we just kind of reach a point and there's not a lot we can do. And that's regarding access. It's regarding LLCs. The responsible party thing is very difficult for us in some of these situations where the property may change hands multiple times. So I've shared that with the law enforcement committee as well. And law enforcement partners are echoing the same statement. It is very hard sometimes to get your responsible party or your bad guy, as these are very savvy organizations that are moving things around.
I have heard you say
So
it.
I feel like we've gotten.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to affirm what you said. I've heard you say that a few times, and I've also actually repeated it a few times myself. So
good.
Water masters.
But I do feel, yeah, no, I do feel like we've gotten great support from the legislators and from our partners at ODA and OLCC here. That increased staffing. If anyone can magically come up with 40 half-ton pickups, DAS is having a heck of a time moving that needle. And that's a statewide and a nationwide problem, right, with shortages. But other than that, I mean, we've got the staff, we've got the coordinated efforts now with our ODA and OLCC partners. We are working diligently to increase our collaborative efforts with law enforcement, with county sheriff and OSP groups. Each year we get better at that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the illicit market, when it comes to the DTO, law enforcement is really going to continue to be the best deterrent, and we are just going to work hard to try and respond to their needs and work collaboratively with them.
Okay.
So
I would have a suggestion.
Okay, I'm not sure who that was, but go for it.
It's Matt Cyrus.
Okay.
I'm also work with Courtney on the Oregon Hemp Association, and I've been doing this since 2016 when they first made it legal. But most of the farmers that I know, the legitimate farmers, would absolutely like to shut down the illicit side. It gives us a bad name. It's something that we don't want to have to deal with. And anybody who's illegally using water is taking water away from somebody who actually has that water right or permit. And something I would suggest, maybe this is the first I'd heard today that there's a number you can call to complain about your neighbor, but maybe publicize that to the existing growers and say, hey, the Hunter Association, they offer rewards for and the hunting groups and for rewards for turning people in. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but at least provide a phone number that somebody responds. I know of 2 supposedly illegal grows in Clackamas County that a legitimate farmer pointed out, and they said they've called and complained and turned them in multiple times to law enforcement, and still nobody's lifted a finger. And one is, I think, Mexican cartel, and I think the other one they said was Russian mafia. And they're big outfits.
Well, those calls, I think, go to the sheriff, the local sheriff. I mean, in Jackson County, if somebody asks me where to report, that's where I direct them, is to the local sheriff.
Clackamas County is ignoring it. But I guess to my point on the water side, it would be nice if if I've got a neighbor that's I know is illegally using water, because most legitimate farmers know their water law fairly well. You know, their phone number to call that get somebody's attention.
Well, so if you parse that down, the illegal use would be either by a legitimate person, in which case it's going to be that's sheriff. The water. Well, if somebody's permitted and they're using water illegally, then that's a water master call, right, Jake?
Yes, correct.
If it's an illegal operator and they're using water, then that's a law enforcement call. And I've heard, you know, certainly in Jackson County, where we have a lot more attention placed on illegal hemp, there are many people who will tell you they've tried calling the sheriff, and the sheriff has not been able to respond, not because they aren't interested in this case, but because they just don't have the capacity, haven't had the capacity to respond to all the calls. So they've really prioritized big grows or whatever criteria they use to prioritize.
So Ms. Marsh, I think Matt brought up a good point. When I actually asked this question, I don't know, a year ago, or a similar question, I wasn't sure if I ever got the answer to. It is the statutory scheme, and we have monthly meetings across agencies that Jake's part of, and DOJ, the Environmental Crimes Unit, is part of those discussions. In those illegal operations where they've got definite illegal water use, they have no intent on, they're stealing water, is the state's criminal structure needs some reinforcement in statute or whatever to call that out what it is as an environmental crime, so that the environmental crime folks can attack that onto that. And I don't know the answer to that, because that's what it is. It's an environmental crime at that point in time. And so that's where I always thought the blank spot is so that it can be part of the prosecution toolkit, I guess, when they take on those folks on that side, so that it's not administrative that way, because that's what was happening in many of the cases where they would go do the bust and realize they were stealing money or stealing water all over the place. And as Matt said, no one supports that. So that we don't know the answer to that, where the legislature could help beef that up, or maybe it's already there and it just needs to be a priority. I don't know.
Sure, go for it, Jay.
Brett Marsh. Yeah, so let's see. So I put in the chat the Find My Water Master page, Matt. So 503-986-0900 is our Salem phone number, but that website will get you to any Water Master office. And please do share that broadly for submitting complaints of illegal water use. I do want to mention we do visit unregistered sites as well. We do exercise safety in that. We do try and be cautious on some of those sites. We'll coordinate with code enforcement or law enforcement as much as we can. But again, they are also inundated, to Rep Marsh's point. So we do try and address as many as we can as safely as possible, be they registered or unregistered. To Lauren's point here, 4061 gave additional criminal authorities to address some of the cannabis issues. Oregon Water Resource Department, as I mentioned before, does have criminal authorities, albeit something that we have used very limited. So the e-crimes group, the environmental crimes group, we have been in conversation with them. They have been in conversation, to my knowledge, with law enforcement partners. Because if it is a citation or it is a statute, it's my understanding law enforcement can also roll that in, or a district attorney could roll it into a process where they raided a site and they also tack on that environmental crime component as well. So we are trying to get better collaborative efforts going between the e-crime group and the county district attorney's offices on that. So that process is evolving, and that is something that is happening. So I wouldn't, at the risk of tossing out some additional criminal authority idea that may or may not be very well thought out, I wouldn't really want to go that direction right now, because 4061 already just happened, and we also do have the ability, I think it's ORS 54990, to do criminal already. So that's just, as I understand it, that just involves time. It involves Department of Justice, county district attorneys, sheriff's office, and or OSP drug teams coordinating that as part of their ultimate penalties that they're assessing on a site that they raid. But I believe the tools are in place to do it.
So Jake, is there anybody that we, part of what we're trying to do today is just identify things on a list that we might want to look at or might want to collect more information about. Can you get an update and report back to us at our next meeting, or is there somebody we should invite to come and talk about that e-crime conversation?
Yeah, so Patrick Atchison is the Department of Justice Environmental Crimes lead, I believe.
Right.
And then I could reach out, or Sunny, or however you would like to be addressed.
Sunny, can you reach out to Patrick and ask him if he could come to our next meeting or another one?
Yep.
Great. So let's, I'm not hearing other thoughts about water right now. Again, I know that there's a lot of interest in this area, but we have also worked it pretty thoroughly in the 4061 process. But I think the environmental crimes discussion is definitely one that we should understand better. So for the moment,
jump in real quick,
please.
Rep Marsh. I owe everybody an apology. I didn't get the British version of COVID, but I too have been dealing with COVID this week, and I neglected to include Jay Nuller on the invite. So I think if we can make sure that we hold the genetic engineering piece for a future conversation, I know that is one that he's very interested in.
Great, we will do that. And yeah.
Interestingly enough, Jay Noller was on the discussion yesterday and did talk about some of the challenges and the research that is needed to understand further some of the genetic problems and unforeseen challenges ahead. So I'm sure he has a lot to add here.
So let's in our next meeting, and Sunny, can you remind us when that is?
We have not set it.
Okay.
I managed to get this one set.
Good job.
Fridays look a little rough between Rep Marsh's and my schedule for the rest of this month. So
for our next meeting, let's focus on, at this point, we have an update on environmental crimes and the application there, as well as maybe there's something that we can do to support that conversation, as well as the genetic engineering issue.
Perfect.
And then my goal today, by the way, everyone, as your reward for coming on a Friday, which is also a holiday weekend, is to get us done in about 5 minutes. But I want to quickly review the second big bullet point that was assigned to us, which is other environmental issues, pesticide, water contamination, site cleanup. So on these fronts, these are the pesticide use conversation is really an ODA. ODA is as much in the middle of that as anybody. I mean, I'm assuming that hemp is subject to the same pesticide regulatory powers that you have for any other crops around appropriate pesticides and application. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So are there gaps or things that we should be thinking about that are specific to hemp?
Not that I can think. I mean, I think the current pesticide regulatory structure is solid, like it is for everything ag related. I think the pesticide issue, the contamination, the barrels of things really was about the illegal piece and the mess they leave when they. Yeah. That's that whole issue. And we can get this committee that we already have a record of pesticide violations in cannabis, the cannabis industry. Our staff are already working through that. In fact, OLCC is funding 2 of our pesticide staff right now, but much of that issue, and we all know that when the counties were forced to take a bulldozer and kind of bulldoze the mess that was kind of left there, and not one agency really knew how to deal with all of that and how to get it cleaned up. I think that was one of the troubling issues, is now what when they're gone.
So who should we bring in to begin that conversation about that site cleanup question, where the enforcement powers are and what agencies? So falling to solid waste, I think that's my understanding too. But I guess the question is, does the solid waste need more powers in simply addressing this? I mean,
No, this is Matt again.
Yeah.
Real quickly, there are so few pesticides approved for hemp, and the end product is tested for pesticides for anybody who is doing it legally. I mean, we didn't use any pesticides at all because this testing is so sensitive that, I mean, it's almost impossible to use anything and not test hot in the end product. So I think you're back to identifying your problems as being primarily in the illegal grows.
Agreed. I think that's right too. Scott.
Yeah, Scott.
So I don't think it works well for hemp, but on the cannabis side, we've had a statute on the books that would allow a lien to be placed on the property to pay for the cleanup cost. It doesn't necessarily establish who's gives you the upfront resources. I know there's some pushback because they hear the stories about the people whose land was leased and they didn't know, and I'm horribly skeptical that that's actually the case. But has that statute been utilized in order to pay for this cleanup? To anyone's knowledge? I mean, we put it back in the marijuana stuff back in, I want to say 18.
Does anybody know?
I don't know. That would be probably at the county or city level.
Sunny,
Yeah,
I think for the, yeah.
Go ahead, Representative. I thought maybe we had something, but it didn't go through one of those legislation that we wanted to make it a statewide recommendation, but are you saying it's only at the county level?
The farmers pushed back on the expanding it to hemp, and there were some changes, and I think in the other cannabis bill in the session. But for cannabis, it was put in. We put it into one of the short session bills. I want to say it was 18, so I'm sorry. It all blends together for me at this point. But
so I think we should get. I think it would be helpful in our next meeting to also try and get some direct input from local county people who are doing cleanup, local solid waste people. Sunny, do you think we could work together to track down 1 or 2 people who could come and talk about that? I mean, what we're really interested in is what they do and what powers they have and what powers would be useful that they don't have.
And are there resources to actually clean it up so that you're not left with an environmental mess?
Yeah, right.
The pesticide issues that came about in Southern Oregon that brought a lot of this was there was a raid on a facility that I think our staff were called to, but when they went in, there were bug bombs placed in the greenhouse like everywhere and just lit off. Well, that's very illegal. You couldn't even breathe in there, so I don't even know how a human could be in there. That was a total illegal operation. It was bad for any human that was in that building at any given time, but then that goes back to our worker safety and our, the employees that are there and all of those things. But the whole operation was illegal, so they were in violation of everything.
So then the question is, are the laws on the books adequate for a situation like that? I mean, that's a ODA. I mean, those pesticide laws are yours, right?
Well, yes. But if somebody's growing illegal marijuana, it would be really difficult for our pesticide staff to come in and say, oh
no,
gee, you're misusing this
But
pesticide product. I think that was
isn't
what
this-
Lauren was describing. We don't
Right.
deal with the disposal after the fact.
no, I understand. I totally understand. But I guess what I was thinking is there a parallel here to, if we talk about making water an environmental crime, or being able to basically throw more charges at somebody once an illegal operation is identified, are there, is there the capability to also address how they've used pesticides as part of the docket that you're putting together to prosecute?
That is something that Patrick can help us with when he comes.
Okay, super. Okay, well, I feel like we have made a good first run through this material, and we have some, I think we've identified some additional resources, some individuals that we need to come in and talk about what the practice on the ground is. A lot of this really may be about just making sure that there's identified crimes, basically, to be able to use to go after people who are illegal operations. That doesn't necessarily serve as a deterrent, but it would allow us to at least hold people accountable. So Sunny, do you feel like you have a good agenda put together of things we want to pursue in our next meeting?
Yeah, or 2 meetings.
Yeah,
Because I'm afraid the GE could take up a whole meeting.
yeah.
Sunny and Representative Marsh, I'm sorry, Sunny, I should have asked you this, but you and I have missed each other. Is the GE discussion really about genetically engineered hemp? Or is it about coexistence? In other words, cross-pollination? Which is it, or is it both?
We split it up so that some of the genetic modification, I think, is going to the cannabinoids group, and ours is more on the contamination issue.
Okay, because those are very different. Okay.
Got it. Okay, well, thank you all very much for coming together. And Sunny, thank you for powering us through and getting us, helping us to reach out to people who can provide us with more information in the next round. And to anybody who's here, if you think of more aspects to this whole puzzle that we need to have on our table, reach out to me, reach out to Sunny, and we'll make sure that we get those issues scheduled for a discussion. Oakley doke.
Okie doke, will do. Thank you, Sunny.
Okay. Thank you all, everybody. Have a good holiday weekend.
You too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You
Thank
too.
as well.
Bye.